The council called humans fragile until they saw him rip through a door reinforced for war beasts. Then they stopped calling humans anything and started updating their threat assessment protocols with words like unpredictable force application and situational strength variance. Let me tell you about the day I learned that human fragility is context dependent and the context that matters most is whether someone they care about is in danger. Spoiler alert, fragile becomes irrelevant when a human decides that physics is negotiable and doors are merely suggestions. My name is Counselor Vectis Tharn, Senior Infrastructure Specialist for the Galactic Council Assembly, and I have designed security systems for 41 different installations over 27 standard cycles. I have calculated load tolerances for structures housing species ranging from 50 kilograms to 3,000 kilograms, engineered barriers capable of containing everything from aggressive herbivores to designated war beasts, and certified containment systems that have held against determined escape attempts from some of the galaxy's strongest species. Point is, I know structural integrity. I understand material science, force distribution, what kinds of stresses different barriers can withstand. I can calculate exactly how much force is required to breach any door, wall, or containment system I design, and I build everything with safety margins that exceed maximum predicted loads by at least 300%. My designs don't fail because I account for every possible force that might be applied against them. Until the human. The incident happened at the Council's primary administrative complex on Station Meridian 7, a massive facility housing diplomatic quarters, meeting chambers, support facilities, and security infrastructure for over 4,000 personnel from 89 different species. Security was paramount given the political sensitivity of Council operations, and I had personally designed the barrier systems throughout the complex. The medical wing was in a separate section of the complex, isolated for contamination control and equipped with species-specific treatment facilities. Access was controlled through reinforced security doors designed to prevent unauthorized entry while allowing emergency egress. These weren't standard pressure doors, they were combat-rated barriers designed to contain war beasts during transport or medical treatment. The doors were constructed from reinforced uranium alloy, 15 centimeters thick, with electromagnetic locking systems rated for 50,000 newtons of resistance. The hinges were military-grade, designed to support the door's 800-kilogram mass while resisting lateral stress up to 75,000 newtons. I had calculated that breaching one of these doors would require either specialized cutting equipment operated for at least 15 minutes, or explosive force equivalent to a military breaching charge. The largest species in Council space, the Krellians, could generate maybe 8,000 newtons of impact force. War beasts specifically bred for aggression might reach 12,000 newtons in a charge. My doors were designed to withstand 6 times that force with comfortable safety margin. They were, objectively, some of the most secure barriers in civilian infrastructure anywhere in the galaxy. Enter Chief Engineer Marcus Torres, and everything I thought I understood about structural engineering became suddenly insufficient. The emergency began during a routine diplomatic session when Ambassador Chen, the human representative, collapsed from what medical scanners later identified as a severe allergic reaction to a compound present in the refreshments. Apparently, someone had failed to account for human dietary restrictions, and Chen was going into anaphylactic shock, a condition that could be fatal within minutes without proper treatment. The medical team responded immediately, transporting Chen to the medical wing's human-compatible treatment facility. Standard emergency protocol that should have resulted in successful treatment and no particular drama. Except the medical wing's access systems malfunctioned. A cascading software failure, probably triggered by power fluctuations from scheduled maintenance, caused all the security doors to lock down in emergency containment mode. The doors were designed to fail secure, preventing potential contamination from escaping medical facilities during emergencies. Excellent design for preventing biohazard spread, terrible design for accessing critical medical equipment when someone was dying. "We have a problem," Dr. Yalith reported over emergency channels. "Ambassador Chen needs immediate treatment, but we're locked out of the human medical facility. The equipment we need is behind security door 7, and the override systems aren't responding. How long until you can bypass the lock?" I asked, already pulling up schematics. Manual override requires maintenance access codes that aren't available during emergency lockdown. We're looking at minimum 20 minutes to get council authorization and implement manual bypass. Ambassador Chen doesn't have 20 minutes, Dr. Yalith said, her Vraxian structure flickering with stress colors. Without treatment in the next 5 to 7 minutes, there will be permanent neural damage. After 10 minutes, fatality becomes likely. I started coordinating emergency response, contacting maintenance teams, requesting priority override authorizations, doing everything by protocol to resolve the situation. It should have worked. The systems were designed with emergency contingencies. We should have been able to get that door open within the critical time frame. We didn't account for Chief Engineer Marcus Torres. Torres was head of the Human Engineering Contingent, a civilian specialist working on infrastructure projects throughout the council complex. He was in the medical wing because he had been visiting a colleague who was recovering from a minor injury, just bad timing that put him in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong moment. Or the right place, depending on perspective. How long did you say? Torres's voice came over the emergency channel, cutting through the coordinated response chatter. 5 to 7 minutes for treatment, 20 minutes to bypass the door, Dr. Yaleth confirmed. Is there any way to expedite? Which door? Torres interrupted. Which specific door is between you and the equipment? Security door 7, section 4 alpha. It's reinforced containment grade, designed for, I know what it's designed for, Torres said. I helped install it. Where are you positioned right now? Outside the door with Ambassador Chen. Chief Torres, we're coordinating emergency override procedures. Please clear the area so maintenance teams can. No time, Torres said, and I heard something in his voice that I couldn't identify. Something flat and cold and absolutely certain. I'm 3 corridors away. Keep chin stable. I'm coming through. Through what? Dr. Yaleth asked. Through the door. I activated visual feeds for the corridor outside security door 7, watching Dr. Yaleth and her medical team working on Ambassador Chen, who was clearly in severe distress. Then Torres appeared at the far end of the corridor, running at a speed that seemed excessive for the situation. He wasn't carrying tools. Wasn't accompanied by maintenance personnel. Just running toward a door that weighed 800 kilograms and was designed to resist 50,000 newtons of force. Chief Torres, I said over the emergency channel. That door cannot be opened manually. Please wait for proper override procedures. Ambassador Chen can't wait, Torres replied, still running. And that door is opening. One way or another he reached the door, and I expected him to examine the lock, assess the hinges, maybe attempt to pry the manual release. Instead, he took 3 steps back, and I realized with slowly dawning horror what he was planning. Chief Torres, do not attempt to breach that door with physical force. It's designed to withstand impact from species 3 times your mass with considerably more, he charged. A full sprint over maybe 4 meters of distance, building momentum, and then he hit the door with his shoulder in a collision that should have resulted in severe injury and 0 structural damage to the barrier. The sound of the impact carried through audio feeds, a thunderous crash of human body against reinforced uranium. The door shook. Visibly shook in its frame, movement that should not have been possible given its mass and the security of its mounting. Torres bounced back from the impact, staggered, caught his balance. I saw him roll his shoulder, testing for damage, then set up for another run. Torres, stop. Dr. Yaleth shouted. You're going to hurt yourself. That door is military grade, I know, Torres said, and charged again. Second impact. Louder than the first. The door shook harder, and I saw something that made my structural engineering credentials feel suddenly inadequate. The frame was deforming. Slightly, maybe only a few millimeters, but the reinforced mounting that I had certified for 75,000 newtons of lateral stress was showing visible strain from repeated impacts by a human who massed maybe 90 kilograms. That's impossible, I said to Kvalek, my Vraxian engineering colleague who was monitoring the situation with me. Human bone density doesn't support that kind of impact force. He should have fractured his shoulder on the first hit. Maybe he did, Kvalek suggested. Maybe he's just ignoring the damage. Torres set up for a third run. This time he started farther back, building more speed, and when he hit the door it wasn't just his shoulder. He drove through with his entire body weight, legs still pumping, converting every bit of momentum into focused force against a single point on the barrier. The door gave. Not much, maybe 2 centimeters of gap appearing between door and frame, but movement that was absolutely not supposed to be possible without heavy equipment or explosives. How is he doing this? Kvalek asked, watching the structural readings. He's generating forces inconsistent with human physiology. The impact sensors are reading over 15,000 newtons on that last hit, adrenaline, Torres said, breathing hard now, his voice carrying over the open channel. He had heard Kvalek's question and apparently decided to answer while setting up for another attempt. Humans have emergency response systems that temporarily override normal physical limitations. We can ignore pain, exceed normal strength, sustain damage that would incapacitate us under normal circumstances. It's called hysterical strength, and it activates when people we care about are in danger. Fourth impact. The door frame buckled visibly now, metal screaming in protest as forces it was never designed to withstand were applied repeatedly to the same stress point. Ambassador Chen is going to die if I don't get through this door, Torres continued, setting up again despite the blood now visible on his shoulder where his uniform had torn. So the door is going to open. My body can be repaired later. Hers can't if she dies. Fifth impact. Something in the locking mechanism broke with an audible crack. The gap between door and frame widened to maybe 10 centimeters. Chief Torres, please, Dr. Yalith said. You're seriously injured. We've contacted emergency services. Help is coming, not fast enough, Torres said, and his voice carried absolute certainty. Chen doesn't have time for proper procedures. She needs treatment now. So I'm providing access now. Sixth impact. The door tore partially free from its upper hinge, a hinge designed to support 800 kilograms of door mass plus significant additional stress. It was failing under repeated assault from a human using nothing but his own body as a battering ram. The structural damage is catastrophic, Kvalek reported, watching sensor readings. He's destroyed mounting points rated for military containment systems. How is he even still conscious? The force feedback from those impacts should have caused severe trauma. Humans can temporarily suppress pain response when sufficiently motivated, I said, remembering data from human physiological studies. But this exceeds documented parameters by significant margins. Seventh impact. The door tore completely free from the upper hinge and buckled inward, creating a gap nearly 40 centimeters wide. Not enough for most species, but Torres was lean and flexible in ways that rigid species weren't. He forced himself through the gap, tearing the opening wider with his bare hands, metal screaming as he literally ripped a reinforced security door open through combination of impact damage and brute force. I'm through, Torres gasped, squeezing into the medical facility. Where's the epinephrine kit? Dr. Yalith, apparently too shocked to question what had just happened, pointed toward a storage unit. Torres grabbed the emergency medication, brought it to the medical team, and then collapsed as the adrenaline presumably wore off and his body remembered that it had just been used as a battering ram against a military-grade door. The medical team stabilized Ambassador Chen successfully. The epinephrine treatment worked, her respiratory system recovered, and she suffered no permanent damage from the allergic reaction. Torres required more extensive treatment, fractured clavicle, severe soft tissue damage, multiple contusions, and what the human doctors called stupid heroic syndrome, which apparently wasn't a real medical diagnosis but an expression of professional exasperation at patients who hurt themselves doing impossible things. I visited Torres 3 days later in the medical wing, after emergency repairs had been made to security door 7 and I had personally reviewed the structural damage. Chief Engineer Torres, I said formally. I need to understand what happened. For my incident report and for my own comprehension of human capabilities, I broke your door, Torres said from his medical bed, his shoulder immobilized in a regeneration field. Sorry about that. I'll cover the repair costs. I'm less concerned about costs than about the physics involved. That door was designed to withstand forces far exceeding what human physiology should be capable of generating. You destroyed it through repeated impacts using your own body. Please explain how. Torres was quiet for a moment, considering. You ever hear about mothers lifting cars off their children? No, it's a human thing. Documented cases throughout our history where someone, usually a parent, encounters a situation where a loved one is trapped under something impossibly heavy. Car, collapsed structure, whatever. And despite the fact that lifting that weight should be physically impossible, they do it anyway. Temporarily exceed their normal strength limits through some combination of adrenaline, desperation, and absolute refusal to accept that someone they care about is going to die while they stand there unable to help. That's neurologically fascinating, I said. But the forces you generated exceeded temporary strength enhancement. You destroyed reinforced structures through repeated high-impact collisions because I had to, Torres said simply. Chen was dying. The door was between me and the equipment that could save her. So the door stopped being an obstacle and became just another problem to solve through sufficient application of force and determination. I knew it would hurt. I knew I'd probably injure myself seriously. I didn't care. Her life was worth more than my temporary structural integrity. Temporary structural integrity, I repeated. That's how you think of your own body? When people I care about are in danger? Yes. My body can be repaired. Death is permanent. So I used the tool available to me, which was my own mass and momentum, and I applied it against the weakest point I could identify in your door's structure repeatedly until something gave. The something that gave was military-grade mounting designed to resist warbeast containment breaches. Yeah, well, warbeasts probably don't have the same motivation I had, Torres said. They want to escape. I wanted to save someone. That's a different psychological state, and it apparently generates different force application. Dr. Yalith entered during our conversation, her crystalline structure showing colors I associated with professional fascination. Chief Torres, I've been reviewing the medical data from your treatment. Your body sustained damage equivalent to multiple high-velocity impacts. Fractured bones, torn muscles, severe contusions. You should have been incapacitated after the first collision with the door. Probably should have been, Torres agreed. Wasn't, though. Adrenaline is an excellent painkiller when your brain decides that pain is less important than accomplishing your objective, but the pain would have been severe, Yalith insisted. How did you continue functioning? I didn't think about it, Torres said. I just focused on the goal. Break door, reach medication, save Chen. Everything else was irrelevant noise. My shoulder hurt. Don't care, keep hitting the door. Blood running down my arm. Don't care, keep hitting the door. Rational voice in my head saying this is crazy and I should wait for proper assistance. Don't care, keep hitting the door. When humans get focused on a critical objective, we can temporarily suppress or ignore pretty much everything else. That's a profound psychological adaptation, I said. But it doesn't explain the force generation. The impact sensors registered forces inconsistent with your body mass and velocity. Did you account for technique? Torres asked. I wasn't just running into the door randomly. I was focusing all my momentum into the smallest possible impact area, using my shoulder as a concentrated force point. Same principle as a battering ram, you don't spread force across the whole surface, you concentrate it at a single point to maximize structural stress. Even with optimal technique, the forces you generated exceeded predictions, I said. There must be some physiological mechanism we're not accounting for. There is, said Dr. Sarah Chen, the human physician who had overseen Torres's treatment. She had been standing quietly in the doorway but now entered the room. It's called myostatin inhibition combined with adrenergic activation. Under extreme stress, human bodies can temporarily suppress the regulatory mechanisms that prevent us from using our full muscle capacity. Why would evolution create regulatory mechanisms preventing full strength use? Yalith asked. Because using full muscle capacity damages the muscles, Dr. Chen explained. Under normal circumstances, humans use maybe 40 to 60% of our theoretical maximum strength. The limitation is neurological, not physical. Our brains restrict how much force we can generate to prevent us from tearing our own muscles off our bones. But during extreme emergencies, that restriction can be temporarily lifted. Adrenaline surges, myostatin suppression, psychological focus, all of these combine to allow access to strength we normally can't use, at the cost of severe injury, I noted. At the cost of reparable injury, Dr. Chen corrected. Chief Torres damaged his body significantly, but everything he damaged can heal. If he hadn't accessed that emergency strength, Ambassador Chen would have died. That's not really a choice from a human perspective. We accept damage to ourselves to prevent permanent harm to others. It's how we're built psychologically. It's insane from a survival perspective, Falek said. Risking permanent disability to save someone else contradicts individual survival instinct. Humans are social creatures, Torres said. Our survival has always depended on group cohesion and mutual protection. Individual survival instinct gets overridden by pack bonding and protective instincts. Chen is part of my community, someone I work with and respect. Her survival mattered more to me than my own safety. That's not unusual for humans. That's completely normal. Over the following weeks, I completely revised my understanding of human physical capabilities and the assumptions underlying my structural designs. Humans weren't fragile in the way other species were fragile. They were conditionally fragile, capable of ordinary performance under normal circumstances but accessing extraordinary strength under specific psychological conditions. We need new design parameters for any structure where human access is possible, I told the Council's Engineering Oversight Committee. Previous calculations assumed consistent force application based on average species capabilities. Humans demonstrate variable force application based on psychological state, and peak performance can exceed predicted values by 200 to 300% or more. You want to redesign security infrastructure based on one incident? Councillor Thex asked skeptically. I want to redesign based on documented evidence that human emergency strength exceeds our predictive models, I corrected. Chief Torres destroyed a military-grade door through repeated impacts using his own body. That shouldn't be possible, but it happened. We need to account for human psychological factors, not just their baseline physical specifications. This will significantly increase construction costs, another councillor noted. Reinforcing every door to withstand determined human assault is excessive, is it? I asked. Because I've now reviewed similar incidents from human history. There are documented cases of humans bending steel bars to escape confinement, breaking through walls with bare hands, lifting masses that require multiple individuals under normal circumstances. These aren't anomalies. These are features of human emergency response that activate with reliable predictability when they perceive threats to themselves or others they care about. So humans are dangerous, Thex said. That's your conclusion. My conclusion is that humans are conditionally dangerous, and the conditions that activate extreme capability are protective instincts and emotional bonds, I said. They're not aggressive threats. They're potential rescue assets who will exceed normal physical limitations to protect others. That's very different from standard danger assessment. The revised infrastructure guidelines were implemented over the following cycle. Security doors in areas with human access were reinforced to withstand forces 400% above previous specifications. Emergency access protocols were redesigned to prevent lockdown situations where humans might feel compelled to force entry. And most importantly, incident response teams were trained to account for human emergency strength and the likelihood that humans would attempt physically impossible rescues if people they cared about were in danger. Torres recovered fully from his injuries, though he retained some impressive scars and a reputation throughout the complex as the human who broke the unbreakable door. He seemed embarrassed by the attention, insisting that any human would have done the same thing in his situation. I suspected he was correct. That wasn't Torres being exceptional. That was Torres being human, which apparently meant having emergency strength reserves that activated when someone needed help, regardless of physical cost or structural obstacles. 6 months after the incident, I encountered Ambassador Chen at a diplomatic function. Ambassador, I wanted to ask about Chief Torres's actions during your medical emergency. Did you know he was capable of breaching that security door? No, Chen said. And I suspect he didn't know either until he did it. Humans don't generally test our emergency strength limits under controlled conditions. We discover them during actual emergencies when there's no other option. Doesn't that seem inefficient? Not knowing your own capabilities until crisis situations. Maybe, Chen acknowledged. But it also means we're not constrained by preconceptions about what we can accomplish. Torres didn't know he could break through that door, so he didn't waste time calculating whether it was possible. He just tried, and kept trying until it worked. Sometimes ignorance of limitations is more useful than accurate assessment of capabilities. That's terrible scientific methodology. That's excellent survival adaptation, Chen corrected. Humans have survived situations that should have killed us by refusing to accept that survival was impossible and just trying things until something worked. That approach has downsides, but it's kept us alive through environments that would have eliminated more rational species. You're describing your species as successful through stubborn irrationality. I'm describing my species as successful through determined optimism and refusal to accept defeat, Chen said. We're fragile compared to many species, yes. We break easier, we damage more readily, we lack natural armor and weapons. But we make up for physical fragility through psychological resilience and willingness to push beyond normal limitations when circumstances demand it. That's not irrationality. That's adaptation. I thought about that conversation many times over the following years as I worked on increasingly complex projects involving human safety considerations. Thought about how fragility was relative, how psychological factors could override physical limitations, how the species that seemed weakest on paper could demonstrate extraordinary strength when properly motivated. The Council called humans fragile until they saw one rip through a door reinforced for war beasts. Then they learned that human fragility was conditional, that protective instincts and social bonds could temporarily transform them into forces capable of exceeding any reasonable structural predictions, and that designing systems to contain or constrain humans required accounting for capabilities that activated unpredictably based on emotional states rather than consistent physical parameters. My name is Counselor Vectis Tharn, and I used to design structures based on maximum predicted forces from known species biology. Now I design structures accounting for human emergency strength, which requires adding significant safety margins to handle forces that shouldn't be possible but demonstrably are when humans decide that someone needs help and obstacles are merely temporary inconveniences. That's not fragility. That's conditional strength that makes humans simultaneously the most physically vulnerable and potentially most dangerous species in council space, depending entirely on whether you threaten someone they care about. Because fragile humans will accept enormous personal damage to protect others, and that acceptance removes the normal limitations that keep most species operating within safe biological parameters. They called humans fragile, and they were technically correct. But they failed to account for the fact that fragile things can still shatter obstacles when wielded with sufficient determination and complete disregard for self-preservation. Chief Torres demonstrated that principle by destroying a military-grade door through nothing but repeated impacts and absolute refusal to accept that Chen's death was inevitable. That's not fragility. That's controlled demolition using human body as the primary tool, and it's apparently a standard feature of human emergency response rather than an exceptional capability. Which means my structural designs now account for the possibility that any human, under the right circumstances, might decide that doors are optional and physics is negotiable. Because that's what humans do when someone they care about is in danger. They ignore pain, exceed normal strength, and break whatever needs breaking to provide help. And they do it while apologizing for the property damage and offering to pay for repairs, which somehow makes the whole thing even more distinctly human.